Passion Harvest. Hello, passionate listeners. Welcome to Passion Harvest, where we aim to inspire you to live a passionate life. Thank you for making me a part of whatever you're doing right now. And if you like this episode, please subscribe. I have a very exciting guest on the show today. His name is Reverend Peter Panagore. He is a mystic preacher, public speaker, author, writer, teacher, and best-selling author. Oh, I repeated myself. Reverend Baldwin has had 2 near-death experiences which changed his life, and I can't wait to find out more about them. Centering prayer, meditation, and Kundalini yoga practices starting in 1977 continue to inform his inner daily life. Reverend Panagore has a Master of Divinity from Yale with a specialty in mysticism. He served as the 5th Minister on FRPCA from 2003 to 2018, broadcasting daily on 2 NBC stations across Maine and New Hampshire on America's longest running religious broadcast. Branded as daily devotions, Peter's inspirational stories and devotions reach 33 million viewers per year. Peter has published 5 books, including the Audible bestseller, Heaven is Beautiful, How Dying Taught Me That Death is Just the Beginning. I love that title. Peter sits on the state of Maine's Domestic Homicide Review panel and served as community minister in Congregational United Church of Christ churches, most recently in Maine, where he lives with his wife. I'm Louisa, your host of the show, and let's dive right in. This is Peter's story, and this is his passion. Reverend Peter Panagore, welcome to Passion Harvest.
Thank you, Lucy, and just call me Peter. I appreciate that.
Okay, sure.
Thanks.
Okay, so thank you. I'm so excited for you to be on the show, Peter. I guess what everyone is most interested is this could be an entire episode, but your near-death experiences. I understand the first one you were trekking in Alberta, Canada.
Mm.
If you feel comfortable, I'd love you to discuss it and how it changed your life and your experience.
Sure, I'd love to. I was 21 years old. I just turned 21. I was a student in Montana, which is south of Canada, directly south of Alberta in the United States. I was on exchange for a year, and I was a backpacker, mountaineer, climber, hiker, Boy Scout, ski patrol, outdoors guy. And come spring break in March in the United States, I didn't want to go back to Boston, which is where I'm from. Mm-hmm. And I decided to go on a trek, and I found a partner at the outdoor club whose skill set complemented mine. He was a lead ice and rock climber, certified, and he had done a fair amount of winter outdoor camping. And so we put our skills together, and we went out for 8 days all together, snow caving, and just across like literally digging holes with shovels in the snow.
And that was fun.
Oh, it was really fun. It was really fun. And so the snow caves would get really warm. It's super thick insulation. So it could be, well, I'm going to speak in Fahrenheit. I'm not sure what it's in Celsius, but it could be 30 below outside. And we could have a candle or 2 running inside the snow cave with a chimney so we wouldn't asphyxiate. And it would be warm enough in there that we could take off our coats and just be in our pants and long underwear. So we weren't uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we did this snow cave trip for 5 or 6 days, and then we were topping off the whole trip with an ice climb on the world famous Weeping Wall, which is in Alberta, south of Jasper, north of Banff, not within a day's drive of the Arctic Circle. And I made a mistake in my gear. Tim was all rigged up, came from a wealthy family, had all the gear that he needed. I had to borrow most of my gear or buy it. A lot of it was used in secondhand. But I couldn't come up with 2 ice axes. I came up with an axe and a hammer, and you need 2 axes to climb. But we agreed that we could do this with a hammer, which is much shorter. And with an axe, you can plant it in the ice, and there's a strap through a hole about 2/3 of the way down the shaft. You can put your hand through the strap and string a bead down to your wrist, and then let go. And you can put the ice axe in and just dangle on this thing. But you can't do that with a hammer, because the hammer's strap is on the bottom and it's much shorter. So you could put it in the ice and you could lock it in place and pull yourself up, but you could never let go and rest. So because I couldn't rest my arms for half the climb, so one arm was always exhausted.
Yeah.
We slowed our climb down till we reached the top of pitch at sunset, and the temperature dropped about 30 degrees because it was March. And all the other teams that were climbing that day on this 500-foot cliff on a, I don't know, must have been a 12,000 foot mountain, but we only went up about 500 feet. They all left at sunset. And by the time we got to the top, we knew we were in trouble. And the sun went down, a million stars overhead, a million stars overhead. So even though the moon wasn't up, we could still see in black and white.
Yeah.
But immediately our temperatures dropped and we started to go into hypothermia. And I'd been on the ski patrol since I was a sophomore in high school. And this particular winter, I'd been pulling people off of the mountain where I was working with hypothermia and frostbite all winter long, because it was a very cold winter. And so I was all up on what was going on. And the first thing that happened to us is that our bodies started to shudder, like vibrate, shudder, and our jaws started clacking like a cartoon, like this, uncontrollable, couldn't stop it.
So what was the temperature?
I don't know, but well, I'm going to guess it was probably 20 below zero, and 0 Fahrenheit. So that's much. 0 Celsius is freezing point.
Yes. I'm going to ask you a silly question here because I'm not a camper. Could you have not built a snow cave, which you were?
Well, we were on an ice wall.
Okay.
And so the whole wall below us and above us was either an ice flow, like on a mountain when the water seeps out of the rock, it seeps out and seeps out and seeps out, and it creates a flow.
Right. So, okay. So it's very hard.
It's very hard. Okay. And there was, we talked about it because Tim pulled up the rope and it became like a 300-foot knot, and which I had to untangle. So we sat there for quite a while as we were discussing what to do. And we realized that we were gonna die. There was no question. And it was die staying there or die moving. And we talked about snuggling up against the cliff face behind us, because we were on a ledge. And it was probably, I don't know, I'm going to guess, because it was kind of dark. It was like 15 feet, 20 feet to the wall behind us. But it was only a wall. There was no protection at all. There was no shelter. The only shelter there was 500 feet down.
Right. And
so we talked about snuggling with each other and try to conserve our body heat. But the sun had just set. We had 12 or 13 hours or whatever it was of darkness and cold before us. And we decided that if we were going to die, we were going to die trying to get off the mountain. And so by this point, our hands started to freeze, our feet started to freeze, our brains started to freeze. Hypothermia set into us pretty steeply. And once we got the rope untangled, we tied each other up. I tied myself with the rope and he tied him in the rope, and we traversed together to the next rappel, and in the dark on this cliff and freezing. And even at that point in the evening, we realized that we didn't have any energy left. We had drunk all our water. We had eaten all our food. We were soaked to the skin because it's a wet sport. You sweat. And it wasn't like the super high tech gear now that wicks stuff away. That didn't exist, and or had just come out. And so we were wet, cold, hungry, and thirsty to begin with, and exhausted. And so we get to the first rappel, and we made our second bad choice. So there was a tree sticking out of the mountain, a small thin tree like a spruce or something, and you're supposed to take a piece of nylon webbing, which is this flat tube that you tie in a square knot, and you make a loop, and then you put the loop around the tree, and you put the line through the loop, and you throw the rope down, and when you get to the bottom, it's able to slide through the webbing.
Yeah.
but we decided we didn't want to spend the money to lose the webbing. So we threw the rope around the tree. And when we rappelled, by the time we got to the next landing area, the rope had frozen to the tree because the rope had been wet.
Yeah.
And now it's locked into the tree, and it's hours later. And by this point, our cognitive functions had begun to slow and fail. It was difficult to speak, difficult to move our lips. It was difficult to move our jaws. We were confused. Our feet were blocks of ice. Our hands were frozen. The snow was up to our knees, and we couldn't get the rope free. And so after yanking on it with both of us on one side, with both, we couldn't get it done. And so my partner Tim, excuse me, my partner Tim had some very, very super thin cord, like super thin cord, but very strong, and it's a climbing cord. And he took two very long lengths and tied one length to the one side of the rope and one length to the other side of the rope with these special hitches called a Persik Hitch, which is a friction hitch. A hitch is like a knot, but hitches can loosen and tighten depending on the friction, upon the pressure creates the friction. And so he tied these two huge loops, and he put one hand on one hitch and one hand in the other, and he put one foot in each of the loops. And I took the long rope and I wrapped it around my waist, and I lay down in the snow and made it as taut as possible, because he was going back up. He was going to ascend 100, 150 feet in the middle of the night with no protection, because we didn't know what else to do.
So were you afraid at this? Were you, I mean, aside from the survival instincts?
Oh my
okay.
God.
So it wasn't only I've got to survive, but were you thinking, oh my God, I'm going to die, and my mother, and I'm such an idiot, all those sort of things?
I didn't think that. That came later, okay? Because I wasn't wasting any of my thoughts on things that weren't about survival, but I was petrified. I still, to this day, I suffer PTSD from that night. And it's I've never been more terrified in my life, and that's to say I've been held at gunpoint. I've been shot at in my life. I've never been more terrified in my life than that night. And so Tim got up like 20 feet, and his motion jerked the rope free, and he fell, and I'm falling, and I roll out of the way, and he lands half on me in the snow, soft snow. Nobody's hurt. And now we've got the rope, and now we can go to the next rappel. Around this time, when we're in the middle of nowhere, this is like super wilderness,
and no one's coming for help.
Nobody's coming for help. And down the highway in the middle, during all of this, comes one car. And so we're jumping up and down and waving our arms, and they just drive by. They never look up, you know. And then about an hour later, when we're finally in the same position, we pull the rope down and we're ready to go, and another car comes down the highway, and only this one, it pulls into the parking lot across the street, and it turns around and it flashes its lights. And so we jump up and down and wave, and we realize that it's the warden, because we had signed into the wilderness log saying where we were going. We had, the night before, we had driven down from Jasper, which is a couple hours north, but it's the closest town, and we had bought some food up there, and we drove down. We didn't get back to the Climb neighborhood until way after dark, and we pulled into the warden's cabin area, and we bribed him to put us up overnight. We cooked him dinner, and we cleaned up, and he let us spend the night in the bunk, and so that we didn't have to go out and set up our tent. It was very nice. But so we liked him, and he liked us, and we signed into the log, and he came looking for us. And I don't know what time it was, but it was after midnight. And so we jumped up and down, and he saw us. We waved our arms, and the moon had come up. So now it's like 3/4 moon, and we can see. And we're super heartened. We're like, oh my God, he knows we're here. It gave us courage. And so then we traverse over, and now we're stumbling too. Now our coordination's beginning to fail, and we're not talking to each other. Only essential words, because every step we took, and this is I can't explain how it feels when every motion you take, you feel your energy deplete. You like, you know, you've got this so much in the battery, and your battery's way down the bottom, and you know that every single step you take is leading you one step closer to salvation and to death. And so we decided not to speak. No more talking because it took too much energy. So we traversed over to the next rappel, which was off the rock, pardon me, off the ice and onto rock. And at the top of this rappel, there was an iron pin and a ring pounded into the mountain. And so we put the rope through the ring, and we descended down this kind of craggy place and around the corner onto this ledge. And Tim was to my left, and on this ledge, which was probably maybe it's like 4 feet.
Yeah.
And there was an iron pin and a ring, and a carabiner and a strap and a carabiner. And Tim hooked into the one that they were permanently there. And he hooked into the one to the left, and I hooked into the one to the right. And I had the rope. And so I took one end of the rope called the bitter end, and I tied it off to my harness, and I took the other end and I threw it out around the corner, because this is we had come down this way like this and then rounded the corner. So I tossed the rope around the corner and I pulled one pull, and I didn't even get any slack. Boom, now it's locked. It must have been some kind of V rock. The rope got caught in.
Yeah.
And when I pulled the line, it just jammed. And so now the rope is jammed. And Tim's close enough to me that he can reach me, but there's not enough line to untie the rope and hand it to him to pull with me. And our hands were frozen, and so we didn't trust our hands, and our feet were frozen. And at this point, the warden flashes his lights and he drives away, because
Oh my gosh.
we're 150 feet up. We're like right next to, we're close, you know? And he's like, it's I don't know. I guess he's like, it's 2 a.m. I'm going to bed. These guys are going to be fine. And I don't blame him, because it looked like we were going to be fine, but we weren't. And
so he was gone. That was it.
It was gone. And now now we know we're utterly alone. And now neither of us panicked. One of the things that we chose for each other, why we chose each other to go on this trip, and what we discovered along the way, is neither of us ever panicked. There was never any irrationality. There was never any fear that overwhelmed our capacity for reason. Even though we occasionally made bad choices, we weren't panicking. And so both of us are super level-headed. And the climbing takes this, creates this super focus.
Yes.
You have to be right where you are in the now, paying attention to exactly what you're doing, and not to the 500-foot free space below you in the ground. Because if you start thinking about that, you get scared. And so it's all about
in the zone.
It's controlling your mind.
Yeah.
And so, but the rope was stuck, and we knew we were in trouble. And I would pull on the rope, and I couldn't get it free. And my hypothermia continued to advance. And now I'm not paying attention to Tim at all. I don't even know what's going on with him. Not even looking at him. And I got hot, which is like one of the last stages where all the blood rushes to your core, and it messes with your thermometer, and you believe that you're hot, but you're really not. You're actually super cold.
Yeah.
And so I unzipped my coat, which everybody does, even though I know better. My rational mind, I know I'm not supposed to unzip my coat, but I'm so hot now, so I unzip my coat, which hastens the end. And so I start thinking to myself, I'm dying here. This is it. And I'm looking around, and I looked around, I saw the great, beautiful mountains, and the millions of stars, and all these colors, and the stars and the moon. And I started thinking about my parents. Now I'm thinking about everybody, and thinking about God, and thinking about dying. And I'd been driving myself all night long with this sort of, like, I think of it as like a mammalian survival instinct. Like I was driving myself with all of my will, and digging this great strength from within me that I didn't even know that I had. And then I get to this point where it was pointless. It was over. And I became content with my circumstance, and sort of a peace settled on me. And I recognized that I was not going to get out of this. And there was nothing I could do about it. And then I began to fall asleep. And when I'd fall asleep, I would just collapse. This is last stage hypothermia, fall asleep. which is, dying of freezing to death, other than how much it hurts with the frozen parts of your body. The actual dying part's kind of easy, as it turns out. So I started to fall asleep, and when I would fall asleep, I just collapse and smack the rock. I had a helmet on, and smack the rock and wake me up and stand back up rather, and pull the rope, and then I don't know how many times that happened, and then I stood back up, and as I stood back up, I got the very last stage, which is the tunnel vision. It's called. It's a physiological thing that happens to your eyes. It's like a fade to black on a stage, spotlight, narrowing, and this is all black, and all I can see is a smaller and smaller space. And I remember looking around, wondering what is going on. I'd never seen such a thing, and it just went just like that. And I thought, oh, I must be falling asleep. And then I thought, but I'm still thinking. And when I was falling asleep before, my consciousness shut off. But now my consciousness is not off, and I didn't feel myself collapse. I'm still conscious. I was confused. And then and from here, everything I say is metaphor, because the whole thing is inarticulable. There's no way to accurately talk
Put it
about
in
it.
words, yes.
You can't. And so I've found words to approximate it, but it's not the thing itself. Okay, it's only metaphor. So my whole vision expanded, and I could see in infinite distance, all darkness, but it was a darkness that I could see in, and way far away, like to the very beginning of the universe, far away from here, there was this pinprick of light, and this pinprick of light was intelligence. It communicated to me as it rushed to me over this incredible distance at in phenomenal speed. I'm taking you. It communicated to me telepathically, and it rushed at me at this. It's faster than the speed of light from this super huge distance, and it remained. It was like sort of a contained intelligence, but it also was like much larger than itself, much larger than its approach to me. And it said, I'm taking you. And I said, no, you're not. I don't know what's going on here, but you're not taking me. And so I put up my willpower, that I thought was super strong, because I'd been driving myself all night.
Yeah.
It was like thin ice. Pop. I just was plucked right out of myself. This thing came to me and took me, and I was afraid. I was frightened. I was like resistance and frightened, and all of my emotions from the night were pushing against this. But as soon as I was out and being carried, I was content. I was enwrapped. I was enveloped. I was comforted and communicated to. All of these things. It was like I was being told to be comforted, told to be content, and I accepted it as truth. And I was rushed at the same speed inside this vast darkness, which kind of collapsed into the proverbial tunnel, but still remained infinite at the same time. And I was popped out, sort of, into an illuminated eternal darkness. So darkness as far as I could see in every direction, but I could see in every direction almost infinitely. And I was left there. And I could see in every direction at once. My first thought was, oh, this is who I am. Now I remember myself. And I was in a place of no thing. I was no thing. I had no hands, no eyeballs, no brain, no molecules. I can't even tell you what the structure of the energy was that I am. I was an orb of consciousness that was contained, and all of my sensory capacities and my intellect and my knowledge were all one thing. They weren't like, this is my hand and this is my eye. My hand and my eye were the same thing. They were all this one thing, and I could see in every direction at once, like I was one huge eyeball, and with 10,000 pupils, and I was content. I was like, oh, finally.
Just resting almost.
Just resting, and I was 10,000 times bigger than I am. I was much larger. And then there was this like I don't know how I describe it as a portal, a gate, a doorway, an opening. I don't really
You're
know.
describing it beautifully and putting it in words, by the way. I know
Well, thanks.
people say it's
And
very hard, but you're doing an amazing job.
well, thank you. I've spent my life in pursuit. We can talk about that after. But
Sure.
the gateway doorway had a tunnel, and the tunnel was, or like a hallway that was also infinite in length. And I was meant to go through this, and I could see its in its infinity. And the doorway gateway had this flowing, shimmering essence covering it that was transparent because I could see the tunnel, but it was also translucent. I could see the flow at the same time. And I took my soul self and I touched my soul self to the flow to feel what it was. And it was all livingness. It was all in all. It was creator. It was life force. It was love and beauty and truth and joy and knowledge and understanding and infinity and bliss and overwhelming power. And it flowed into me. And then I talk about this thing in a sequence of events, but this is timelessness. It's like all time and no time, all future, all past, not just like a linear past and future, but like a time that expands in 3 dimensions rather than in one line.
Yeah.
And that's a terrible analogy
No.
because it doesn't
I
capture
get
it.
it.
But so I'm in this timeless space, and this flow enters into me, and then all these things happen at once. I hear my name called, but it's not Peter. It's the essence of the source of my being called into beingness. It's the from the moment of my creation, which I can simultaneously see. I can see the long tail of my everlasting soul and the moment of my creation, which was eons and eons and eons ago in time space, but which was continual when I was there. And I was like a singular photon that was wave and particle at the same time. And I was the same as the creator, but I was a much, much smaller, fragmented piece, and therefore a created being. And creator said to me with no sound and no voice, no language, no gender, I am creator. I made you. I created you. You are my creation. You belong to me. And I could see exit entrance points of my other lives, which were these like this tiny thinness of how I had lived or was living, because I was in timelessness.
Because
It seemed
everything's
like
happening at the same
everything's
time.
happening at once, and I couldn't see where these lives were or are. But they were very, there were many of them, and they were very small in comparison to the size of my soul. They were almost insignificant. And I also still had the Peterness. I still had some identity as
Yes.
Peter. And that was also like a micron thin coating on the very top of my soul. And so I was told I was creature. I was told I was created. I was told I was beloved. And then I went through a hell of my own making, is the way I phrase it.
Oh.
I suffered all of the pain that I gave to everyone in my entire life from their point of view.
In the life
And
of Peter or
in the
all
life
your...
of Peter, thank
Okay.
you, in the life of Peter, and all of the pain that I had intentionally given, and all the pain that I had not intended to give, just by accidentally hurting people.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out that the pain that I gave away was 10,000 times worse than I ever thought it was. Every single incident was 10,000 times more painful than I thought it was when I gave it away. And you know how, a lot of it was to my siblings, because I was, the ones I interacted most with.
Sure.
And
Everything has a residue, I've found that as well. Like everything has an energy. Every thought, word, and action has consequences.
exactly, exactly. And it turned out that I didn't just give it to them, but I really gave it to myself. And that
Mm.
all the pain that I gave to them, because I experienced it from their point of view, as if I was them, juxtaposed to all of my reasons for causing their pain simultaneously, and then and the voice that had no sound kept saying inside of me, I love you, I made you, you're my beloved, I forgive you, I love you, I love you. And I then sort of compared myself to the holy love and
Yes.
saw my limitedness, which is when I understood my creatureness, when I saw all of the sins that we commit of suffering, giving suffering to other people. It was this sort of equality among all created matter that it's just like it's like a side effect of being created. This is what happens to you. I don't blame you. I know this about you. I've always known this about you. I love you as you are. And so I judged myself guilty, and I turned to love, and I was utterly, completely forgiven. And it seemed to me that not only that all the love, not only that all the pain that I'd ever given away in my life that was all gone. I was completely healed, and there was no more suffering. I was completely well, but also all of the love that I'd ever been given in my life, and all the love I ever gave away, I still had that. I still had this store of love with me. And it seems to me that that helped me see the love of the divine. And I was healed and whole, and suffering ended, and there was no more pain. And I was infilled with bliss and awe and beauty and joy, truth and knowledge, and anything I needed to know, I knew in an instant, everything about that. And I was ferocious in my pursuit of knowledge in that moment,
Knowledge.
because whatever I thought I needed to know was instantly downloaded into me. And I was infilled with this oneness, this unity of being, to the point of it felt like one more drop of it I would obliterate. It was almost painful, but it was pure bliss. It was one more drop, and I would have folded back into the unity in totality. And I said, without sound, am I dead? And the voice said, yes, you're dead. I said, well, I can't die now. Why? It's time for you to come home. Come home with me. Come home to me. I said, well, my parents are suffering. My sister had run away when I was a kid, vanished. My mom had a breakdown. My dad was angry. It's a decade long of suffering in my family, which is why I was out west and not in Boston. I
Right.
was running from my family. And, but I said, I can't take another child from my parents. That
Oh,
it'll ruin them. And I was swept out of heaven to the very edge of the universe, where I could see Earth like a hologram, but I could see every single human being all at once, like living human beings, all 7 billion of them, all of them super clear to me. Every personality, every face, every action, everything that they were doing and who they were. It was all clear. And everyone was covered by a veil. The whole planet was covered by a veil. And I could see my parents' faces in particular. And I could see my parents' current suffering, and I could see the length of the suffering that they would incur should I die. And the voice said to me, now you know the truth. In the way that I love you now, I have always loved you. And I can't describe to you. I can't. The amount of love is the most amount of love. Take all the love that ever existed on earth and all history and crush it into one moment. It doesn't even compare. It's eternal love is all there is. It's completely fulfilling and cleansing and holy and immense. It's infinite. And the voice says, in the way that I love you now, now you know I've always loved you this way. Was,
so
is,
beautiful.
and will be. And I love everyone like that. And because of my love, your parents will be well. Everybody will be healed when they come back. Everyone will know. No one, they can't see it now because they're in the veil, but you can see it now. You're above the veil, and you can see how much I love every beloved person. And it was like I was the special child. I was the most beloved child in the family, but I could see that that was true for every single human being. So it seems like it would be a contradiction here, where you get one special kid
The
and you love
favorite
the
one.
letter, the favorite one. I was the favorite one, but everybody was the favorite one. There was no, and that was really clear to me, that everyone was particularly beloved. And the voice said, because of my love, now you know, in the way that you're healed, when your parents die, they're going to be well too, just like everybody else. So why don't you just stay home, stay here with me? And I said, well, I'm in this theater company. We're leaving on this big tour. We've been in rehearsal for a year, for the academic year, 64 shows, 24,000 miles, all over the United States, big deal. And I made a promise, no understudies. I made a promise. I said, I have a commitment. I made a promise to these people. And God said,
As if that matters at this stage. Like, you've just experienced this incredible, like, everything and nothing you're worried about.
right, right. And I'm like, but I made a commitment. I got it. And God said, it's time for you to come home. And I said, do I have to stay here? And and my parents, it was really about my parents. And God said, no, you don't have to stay here, but I want you to stay here. I said, so if I go back, can I come back to this heaven, to this infilling, this unity, this presence with you? And God said, yes, you can come back. And I said, well, I choose to live my life. And God said, you won't live your life, and sent me back. And on my way back, it was like, there was like this suspension bridge cable, and like a big, huge cable. And it's cut off, and it has all these little thin cable. You know what I'm talking about? It's like all this thin wire that's all wound up together.
Yep.
And each one of those butt ends of a strand was an entry point back into my life. And there were maybe 10 million entry points back into my life. And in the middle of those was an intensity of light, a singular, like white light middle that radiated out toward the edges with more intensity to the center. And each one of these strands seemed to be not like a single strand that runs all the way across the bridge, but each one of was made of 10,000 different channels that could be choices. And so I chose, and I don't know why, I chose a certain entry point. And I didn't choose the center of the light. I chose just off to the side of the light, like a little bit farther out. And in I went, and back I went. And the next thing I knew, I was being reduced, like crushed in a compactor, and I felt like I was being twisted back into my body again. Only I didn't know what my body was, and I didn't understand what physicality was. All I knew is that I had no pain, and I could understand everything, and now I was in pain, and I understood nothing. And I didn't know what I was as a human being. And all I knew is that it hurt, and it took a while for me to come up, like the consciousness to come
Yep.
back online. And I was being moved, and which I didn't understand. And I heard noises which my ears could perceive, but I didn't understand what was being said. And finally I was pulled up, and I stood up. It was my partner Tim hauling me up. And when finally my head was back together again, he was screaming at me, "You were dead. You were dead. If you died, I was gonna die." And I, I'm like, what is this place? Who are you? Where am I? What is going on here? Why do I hurt? All these things running through my head. And he got me to pull the rope. And in the first pull, the rope came free, and we descended. And our car was across the street in the parking lot, because it was only like, I don't know, less than a couple hundred meters. It was 100 meters or so out to the road. And we enough of my brain came back that I knew that you don't jump in the car and turn on the heat. You got to slowly bring your body temperature back up. So we set up the tent, and we slowly brought our temperature back up. And when we were warm enough, we got into the car it was well after sunup. At this point, it was early morning, and sat in the car for an hour or so till we heated up enough to move. And then the warden came looking for us, and asked us if we were the boys on the mountain last night. We said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I came to see if I had to collect your bodies." Like, oh my God.
God.
So on the way home, Tim, he was driving, he sped through a town. We got pulled over by the Mounties. They locked us up in jail for a couple hours.
Oh my gosh.
We paid our, we
Wow.
and then we totaled the car a couple hours later, head on into a semi, and we had to split up and head on into to the rear wheels of the semi, and my fault. And we had enough money to send Tim home on a bus with some of the climbing gear, all the climbing gear, and with the ski gear, and I took the climbing gear and I hitchhiked back to Bozeman. And from the moment I began to have that next morning, after I wrecked the car, I was like an alien in an alien world. Eating was this bizarre thing. Everything around me was weird to me. Everything around me was ugly, flat. Um, Nothing compared to the beauty of heaven. Beauty being the operative word over there. Everything it's just so beautiful. And then I hitchhiked back to Bozeman, and I look like the same guy, and I'm in this theater troupe, and we're leaving on this tour, and I was supposed to be a driver, and now I've got a stutter. So the car wreck gave me a stutter, but this is a sign language theater, so it wasn't no spoken words.
Okay.
And so, but I couldn't drive the truck or the van, and so I sat in the back of the pickup truck that was pulling the trailer for the whole 24,000 miles, minus a half a day, by myself, trying to figure out what had happened to me, and meditating all day long when we were driving between shows. Lost, alien, alone, and everybody thought I was the same guy. Everybody in the theater group, they're all treating me like I was the same person. I was not the same person. I came back an entirely different person. Same personality, same character traits, but I was like living inside this thing, looking out through my eyes, like trapped in this, and wondering what I'm doing here and why I came back. And I began immediately to say to myself, well, I made a mistake. I should not have come back. I should have stayed dead. And I began to pray every day for my own death for years, decades, even.
Really?
So that's a long story, but that's kind of the summation of it.
What an incredible experience. I'm just a bit blown away, and the way you describe it is so beautiful. I've got a few questions. So you say you prayed for, just on the last thing that you said, you prayed for years for your death. Is it, people come back from near-death experiences completely different, very, very different. But my understanding is that they're a more expanded version of themselves. Did you?
Yeah, I'm a more expanded version of myself. But I'm also a different person. And I prayed for my death because I was ticked off. I felt like I was tricked. I mean, I know that I made the choice.
Yes.
I asked to come back, but I didn't know what it meant. And what it meant was I was an alien in my body. I was a stranger in a strange world. I was like an interplanetary spaceman that landed on a planet and put on a skin suit and was pretending to be everybody else. And it was not even a pretty planet. It was not even a nice planet compared to where I was from.
And no one understood you.
Pardon?
And no one understood you.
No, I couldn't tell anybody. I decided pretty early on, as soon as I understood that next morning when I began my hitchhike back to Bozeman, that I was called to be a messenger. I was called to speak this message of the truth of the other side, that it exists. I was like, no frickin' way. I am not doing that. I am zipped my lips.
I'm not going to be that weirdo.
I'm not going to be that guy. That's exactly what I decided, because how could I possibly? I didn't even understand what happened to me. I didn't have any language for it. I couldn't process it. I just had this radiance inside me that I didn't understand, that was talking to me, and always talking to me. And it was always like I never fully came back into my body, that most of me was still up here. And I was always sort of looking into myself out. And then there was always this conversation in the background without language. It was always this, calling my name all the time, my
Mm.
soul name all the time. And it was like, I liken it to the Eye of Sauron and the Tolkien trilogy, the evil eye that sees everything, only it's not an evil eye. Are you
Oh,
a Tolkien fan?
no,
Are
I
you
haven't
into that?
seen it, but
Well, anyway,
I will one day.
yeah, you will. The books are better, um, as always is the case. I had this all-seeing eye that was always staring at me and never allowing me to look away. It was always present with me, always inside of me. And I am kind of a rebellious person by nature. I'm always the one like, oh, you told me to do that? I think I'll do the opposite as a kid.
Yeah, so was
So,
I. It didn't
so
always serve me very well, but
no, it did not. Me neither. So I became resistant. And but meanwhile, I was very fortunate because 3 or 4 years before, I'd been taught meditation centering prayer when I went to a Catholic prep school, and it was near this monastery where the monks 20 years before had been studying with Sasaki Roshi and Maharishi Mahayogi,
Mhm.
and they're Trappist Catholics, okay, but they're trying to reinvigorate their prayer life, and so they developed this thing called centering prayer, and I learned that form of meditation when I was in high school, and so that's what I dove into. I'd already been practicing, been meditating for several years, but I found that when I went into my meditation, I found some stability. I felt like I could deal with the world a little better
Yeah.
when I found my connection inside. And what I discovered was the deeper I went inside, the more stable I was in the world. So I reoriented my entire life back in pursuit of the oneness of being in order to gain back a little bit of what I had left behind, which was 99.9% of it. And so I changed my whole life. Everything after this theater tour, I went back. I completed my undergraduate degree in English. I was going to be an architect in the family firm. I was going to go to grad school in architecture, and I didn't. I went to divinity school to study mysticism, and intending to be a monk myself.
Okay. I just wanted to ask you just briefly before, and I'd love to touch on that. You talk about the veil when during your near-death experience, you go outside the earth and look at everyone has a veil. Does that mean we're almost unconscious of what life really is and what life is about?
Yes, completely.
And
It's sort of like the Matrix movies.
I've seen that.
Yeah, it's sort of like that without the evil overlord. Instead of the evil overlord machines, it's love. But nobody really, even the most wise person among us who's seen the most amount of light that anyone in the history of the world ever has, only gets a glimpse here. And for
Mm.
the most part, everybody's blind. And it's not their fault that they're blind. And I would guess, and this is just a guess, that most people have some kind of mystical experience. And they may rationalize it away. It's a glimpse of the holy, of the numinous, of the luminous. Um, but it's only ever a glimpse. Even the most enlightened person, it's only ever a glimpse here, because the veil is the freaking brain. It's the brain
Right.
and the eyeballs and the hands. It's the way we perceive the world, and it's the ego inside ourselves that likes itself and doesn't want to admit that it's not real.
Mm.
And all
That there's a
these
whole
things.
multi-dimensional level. Obviously it's
Yeah.
so hard to put into words this, but you've done it beautifully, this experience. When you understood that everyone had a veil, and I know you just mentioned it was the brain, what did it look like? If you can describe it in words, is it like a cloak or is it a
It was like a
shadow?
cloak over the whole thing, over the entire earth, a singular layer, a gossamer layer over every single thing, over everyone and everyone. And it was one layer. That's the way it looked to me. It was the very structure of the earth is the veil itself. So the body and the mind and the eyes and the ears and the brain, that's part of the veil too. But the whole kit and caboodle, the whole universe is the veil. the whole thing, like from the Big Bang to where we are today, all of it is permeated and made with the secret ingredient love living inside it, the heaven within. But the whole thing is, it's all hidden, and
Then I guess
it's
the
around
question
us.
is, why the veil?
I think because without the veil, it would be heaven, and then it wouldn't be the universe. Because if you could perceive the totality of the light, then you're not here anymore. You're there.
So all these human experiences we have in these lives, is it for our soul's evolution and growth? Why are we learning what, why is there pain and suffering and, heartbreak and of course love, but why are we experiencing this then?
Well, I think the other near-death experiencers talk about it as a school of learning
Mm.
and for advancement of souls, and that may be true. But in my experience, I I knew everything on the other side. I didn't need to be here. I became dumb coming here. I became ignorant coming here. I became less than coming here. And so it seems to me that when I perceive light in other people, which is, I see light in people, that's what I see. But when I see the intense light in people and they see it in me, it's the light seeing itself. And so it's the love loving itself. And so I think that what we're human beings, the purpose of living is to bring that light love more into this universe, to make space for this inside ourselves so that it becomes this sort of unified field of light and love. I don't know if you've ever been in the presence of an individual or a group of people who have a lot of light inside them. And when they gather together in a group, like if these international association for near-death studies conferences that I go
Mhm.
to, when we're all gathered together, it's like this huge bubble of light. It's like walking into a wall, through this wall that's permeable into a more intense light. And I think that human beings are the temple of God, and that our job is to love each other, to bring more love into the world, and to become channels of light, and to dig our way back to God, to dig from our side, to create more space inside ourselves for the light to flow through out into the world. It's all temporary. It seems like it's one of the other things that I saw on the other side is that the length of my life as a 21-year-old, wink of my eye, that fast, that fast.
Right.
And the truth of that is that even though it feels eternal here, it is not. It's very temporal and very not lasting. And the great escape is that you get to die and you don't have to suffer forever. You get to go home. And so part of the practice here is to recognize through contemplative practices that you are not you don't identify with your ego. You identify with your soul. And when you begin to identify with your soul, it doesn't take away the suffering of life, but it makes it bearable. It makes it, because you recognize the temporality of existence, but but because you recognize the eternal nature of your soul. And when you begin to recognize the eternal nature of your soul, it makes all life easier to bear, even the terrible things.
Mhm.
I'm not immune to grief. I'm not immune to suffering. I'm not immune to um, any of the human experiences. But all of them as I experience them, aren't from my body first. They're from this other perspective of, oh, that's what my body is experiencing. Oh, that's really terrible. That really hurts. Oh, I'm really in grief. Um, but that's what my body's experiencing. There's always this sort of
Observing.
observing.
Thank you for that. That was really well expressed. And I just want to acknowledge something you said before, um, when you were talking about your siblings during your experience, that when you actually hurt others, you're actually hurting yourself. And I think that's
Yes,
so powerful as well.
yes, that's exactly what was going on. And and when I come back with this complete awareness that that's true right now, and that every time I hurt somebody, I'm hurting myself.
Yes.
And so I wonder, I expect to go back through that purgation, that divine fire of love that cleansed me of the things that I shouldn't bring with me and didn't need there. And it was when I was all these all the suffering was burned away from me, boiled away from me, that I became expansive enough to have a large enough containment unit that was pure enough, empty enough to be infilled with the oneness of being. And all those human experiences, they're not my soul. They're my human experiences. My soul is the beloved thing. My
Mm.
soul is the beloved. And so how can I experience the beloved when I'm carrying all this other stuff with me? I don't need these things with me. And so the divine relieved me of them. And so one of the things, I've created this long list of words, this word jumble in my book, where I try to truth, love, knowledge, bliss, adoration, awe, understanding, healing, all these long string of words together to contain the totality of the oneness of being. But all of those things are all love. They're all, like, we talk about joy, that's love. We talk
Yeah.
about charity, that's love. We talk about forgiveness, that's love. Truth is love. Knowledge is love. All these things we separate here into these fragments, they're all one thing. And I just want the one thing.
I think we all do.
Yeah, we do.
I think we all do. But we are human at the same time, so we do
Oh
get
yeah,
sidetracked. I just
we
wanted to
do.
briefly touch on, again, just one more point. This is so fascinating, and then we'll move on quickly. During your near-death experience, you were looking at the world and you saw, all the humans around the world. Some people do talk about, as you did mention, we're living parallel lives. It's not past, present, and future. We're living parallel lives. Are there multiple? I don't know if you know this. I just wanted to ask the question: are there multiple versions of us living now that you were aware of? If I'm explaining
I
myself
know what you're
correctly,
saying,
is
and
there
I
another
don't.
Louisa, but maybe another person in the world with the same soul?
I didn't see that.
Okay.
What I did see is that my soul was myself, my true self, and
Hmm.
that there were sort of spindly little growths off of my soul that were manifestations of me in I don't know, this world, another
Right.
universe. I couldn't tell. And maybe when I was dead I could see it, but now I can't. I can't. This is the thing. This thing keeps unfolding before me. I keep remembering things about it, but they're only fragments compared to what it was like
Yeah.
on the other side. It's always fragmented here. It's frustrating.
Yeah, but well, you did a great job. And I just obviously, since you're a reverend, I just wanted to, touch on that. How do you explain the multiple lives?
Oh,
Um,
I became a reverend as a kind of like so that I could spend my life in study and prayer, and nobody would ask me any questions.
okay.
So when I came back, all of my religion was gone. All of my belief systems, everything. Not when I say my belief systems are gone, I mean like in everything. I didn't believe in food or culture or politics or in anything, nothing. I believed in nothing. And all of my belief was gone, all of my faith was gone, and all of my doubts about God were gone. I know God is real. I know that's where I'm from. I know that I'm known by the knower. I know that I'm pursuing the pursuer. I know that I can't escape. But all of my belief systems, they were
The
gone,
traditional Christian Catholic
all of it.
beliefs.
And yet I realized, because of my where I grew up and my studies, that there might have been other people like me in the history of the world. And so I decided to look into the mystics. And I found among the mystics, I found them among my peer group, and the mystics who have the unitive experience of the divine, where the self is not present, they come back into the context of their culture and their language and their education and their history, and they use those tools to describe the indescribable. And so that's what I decided to do. I looked around and I thought, where am I going to find the tool sets that I need in order to understand my own experience? Because this wasn't really about sharing it, because I was keeping my mouth shut.
Right.
It was really about trying to contextualize it for myself in a way that I could language it to myself so that I could have some understanding of what had happened to me. Because when this happened to me, near-death experience was not a thing. Nobody was talking about
No.
it. And I was afraid that if I was talking about it, people would think I was crazy. So keep my mouth shut. And so I decided to go back to the monastery where I'd had some little bit of relationship when I was a high school student. And when I was an undergraduate that year and the year after, I ended up going on a retreat at the same monastery with a class, even though I went to a public university. It was a Zen retreat at the monastery. And I met a monk. And this monk radiated. I could see light in people from the moment I came back. I could see their little shimmer around them. But this guy, he was like this radiant, fiery, flaming beacon. And I was like, oh my God, that's what I want. And I decided to like attach myself to him. And I attached myself to him for like
energetically,
well, kind of more like
physically as well.
I was sort of like the unwanted mentee.
Right.
You know, you're my mentor. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. So I kind of attached myself to him for a couple of decades, and I decided to become a Trappist monk. And so I began because he wasn't the only one who radiated there. And so, but I decided that I was too afraid of living without sex, and so I better understand a little bit about spirituality before I went into the monastery.
Okay.
So I applied to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, and I decided to I got accepted at Yale, and I decided that's where I'm going to go, and I went there specifically to study mysticism, which they don't teach in the divinity school, but they do. There are classes around the university, and the dean of admissions became my independent study teacher for 3 years and allowed me 3-year course on my own to study mysticism. And then at the end of all of that, I was going to go off and get my doctorate in an esoteric subject. And she convinced me that I should consider being a minister in her denomination. And I was like, okay, if you think so. You were so good to me. So I did, and I got ordained, and I got recruited and ordained, and I got to spend my life in study, in meditation. Nobody questioned me that I was spending an hour a day in meditation and an hour a day doing yoga.
Right. Because
As long as I
it
got
was
my job
considered
done,
acceptable, right?
it was acceptable, right?
Yeah.
And I could continue to study mysticism. And I read all of the Gospels, the non-canonical Gospels. I read through the entire library of the Nag Hammadi texts and everything. I just read everything, and nobody questioned me as long as I did my job.
And you could have a partner as well.
And I could have a partner as well, and I did, and I have kids, and I'm a granddad.
Congratulations.
And, thanks. She's the star of my life, and the reason. Well, I got a moth, and the reason that I got some moths living in my studio here with me. She's the reason I came back for the second time. But so I don't even remember I got distracted by the moth and my granddaughter.
We were
like
talking
my granddaughter.
about having partners and things, and the gorgeous granddaughter. In the essence of time, I'd love to briefly touch on your second NDE and how your life's changed and what you've learned from your experiences.
So I'd been praying for my death every day for my whole life, along with meditation and Kundalini practice. And then we have a genetic thing in my family. It's a heart condition, and killed my granddad, killed my sister who had vanished. She died when she was 56. And would have killed my dad, but they life flighted him and injected him and saved his life. And it killed me. Same deal. I'd run a 5K the day before and was in a yoga class, and I had a heart attack. And by the time I was in the ambulance, headed an hour and a half to the catheterization lab, 45 minutes after I left, 45 minutes to an hour after my heart attack to go to the hospital. And the doc told my family, my wife and my kid, my son, who was 26 at the time, that I was going to die on the way, that they better say goodbye to me. And
Gosh.
and so my son leans into me as I'm getting rolled on the gurney, and he looks at me. He's a very loving, compassionate guy, and he says, "I love you, Dad," and squeezes my hand and comes in really close and looks me in the eye, and then I look at my wife as I go, and I'm like, "See ya. I am not coming back. This is
Oh,
my first," and she knows this about me. It's my first opportunity to legitimately die. I was told I can't take my life. I'm not
mm,
allowed to kill myself. I didn't make me. I didn't even my soul. It's not like I didn't make Peter. It's like I didn't even make my soul, and I don't. I'm not my own creator, and I'm a creature, and so I don't belong to me. And so I've been waiting my whole life for this opportunity to go legitimately. And on the way, I hear the paramedics say, "We're losing him." And I open my eyes, and I'm not on any morphine because I can't take any opiates. They make me sick.
okay.
And so I'm meditating. Here's one of the magical things about meditation. You can separate yourself from your pain. So, and you can separate yourself from your physical pain.
Yes.
And as long as you're in your meditation, there's almost no level of pain. There are some levels, but there's almost no levels of pain as long as you have control of your mind, that you can't separate from. And so I'm separated from this great amount of pain in my heart in my meditation, but I'm cognitively capable. And I hear them say, "We're losing him." And I open my eyes and I look at her and I close my eyes. And when I close my eyes, I'm out of my body. I'm out. And now I'm out of my body and I'm in the dark space again. And the same angel of death intelligence comes rushing toward me. "It's your time. Come, welcome. We love you. It's your time. Come, come, come." I'm like, I'm going. And so I'm starting to leave. And as I start to leave, I think to myself, this time is different than the last time. I'm aware of what's going on. I'm not in resistance at all. I'm I have time to think about this. It's just like, let me think about this. So I kind of turn my inner eye back into myself, and I think, I see my son saying, "I love you, Dad." And I see my wife, and I see my daughter, and my granddaughter, and my daughter had just become a single mom. I'll spare all the details,
Yeah.
but she had become a single mom and a brand new baby, and she needed us, needed me. And I wondered, who is going to protect this baby? Who's going to be the man in this baby's life? Um, and so I turned back to the angel, and I basically said, I'm not coming." And the angel had rushed back toward me, and I just turned away and went back in. And that was that. I was back. And
So no regrets about it the second time.
no, because I came back to care for this little life that really needed me. Now she's
Yeah.
5. She was 1 at this. She'd just been, not even 1. She'd been born in February. And this was August. She was a brand new kid, and I'm here for her. I've been here for my parents, and they're elderly now, and they're beginning to pass. Now they're about 90, and it's been a hard 6 months for them. And my duty now is to help that transition, and my duty with my granddaughter is to be here as long as I can for her, to give her the stable love that I can give her in the replacement of her father. I'm kind of the
Beautiful.
replacement dad.
Right.
And so meanwhile, my whole orientation from the moment of my return the first time has always been to be this messenger person, even though I resisted. And I finally came out about 20 years ago now. There was a big embezzlement, a crime in our church, and it was a very terrible thing that happened over a long period of time. And in the end, I decided to tell my congregation the truth. That someone said to me, "You must have had a lot of faith to put up with us." I'm like, "I don't have any faith at all." That's how I was able to put up with you. um, so I decided to tell them the story, and I told them, and then I ended up in television for all those years. And then just after I died the second time, the TV show began to close. And so now I find myself sort of full time trying to earn a living while I'm fulfilling my duty.
Well, what an incredible ambassador you are.
Well, Thanks. I hope it. I I think that there's this global movement going on. I think that for 50 years, science has been raising the dead, and that there are near-death experiencers by the tens of millions in every country around the world, and I'm just one of them. And I think that the message that's coming back is this divine message of love that's being filtered through all these Jews and agnostics and Sikhs and Jains and all these cultural, and everybody's coming back with the similar message of love. I think
Yeah.
that that's what's happening.
Well, you're doing an amazing job. I've got two more questions. Do you go hiking anymore? Or rock climbing, ice climbing?
I have not gone ice climbing. I have not gone ice climbing, but I have done some rock climbing. I live on the ocean now. I made a choice between ocean and mountain. I still ski. I'm still a mad dog skier. But I get most of my adventure. I get most of my adventure through skiing or sailing. I do a lot of sailing, and
It's a little bit safer.
oh no, it's not.
Oh, no, it's not? Okay.
It's not. No, sailing is it can be a martini on the yacht.
That
I
sounds
don't own a
nice.
yacht, okay?
Okay.
I don't own a yacht, but it can be. I have had martinis on other people's yachts, but that's not really what we're doing out there. It's all about this mental. Sailing is all. It's very similar to rock climbing. Is that it takes intense moment. Focus in the moment where you are, and you have to know what you're doing, or you're in serious trouble, and that's why it's fun.
Okay. Amazing answer. My second question is, and I always like to ask the guests, if someone's looking to find their passion, or I mean, there's many words for it, or to live a life filled with purpose and passion, what is your advice?
Heaven is within. If you really want to understand yourself, it's not about trying to manifest the dreams you have for the world in your own life. It's about pursuing the thing that is eternal. It's about diving inside. You might be able to manifest joy in your life. If you focus on joy and gratitude, you get joy, but you might miss truth and knowledge and beauty and love. If you focus on the oneness of being, if you go within, you get all those things. You get all of them. And if you're looking for the purpose in life, the purpose in life is to claw your way back to God. And that's where the peace is. That's where the peace comes from. It's where the stability comes from. It's where the strength and the courage comes from in order to face whatever terrible things that happen to us: cancer, divorce, loss of a child, coronavirus. Uh, that all comes from the strength within, from focusing on the oneness of being and the pursuit of this. And I'm not the first one to say that. I have teachers upon teachers upon teachers, most of whom, 99% of whom, have been dead for centuries, but they left their books behind to tell us the same truth, that contemplation and meditation leads to, well, it leads to peace.
Lovely message. What a great way to end the show. And for anyone that's wanting to connect with Peter, all his details will be in the show notes. Peter, thank you so much for being on Passion Harvest.
Lucia,
I wish we had more
pleasure.
time. It's been such a delight. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Lucia. And I love Australia. Just saying, I don't know how big your audience is globally, but for the Australians out there, I want to visit. I'll be down
Good.
someday.
Can't wait for you to come. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you very much,
Bye.
Lucia. Bye.